Sorry about that. I don't tour around the country invading myself in the meetings. It was just that we've got a meeting of councillors against the cuts at the council house, so I was asked if I could pop in as well. Let me just say this very briefly, and then I'll bugger off and let you get on with the real work. Meetings like this are happening all over the country. Anti-cuts discussions are taking place. Individual groups are coming together. Campaigns are being formed. Occupations are taking place that you never read about in the media, demonstrations, anti-eviction campaigns, solidarity work on a scale, to be frank, we've not seen for maybe a generation at least. I've been around a long while. I'm an archaeological exhibit from the 80s. I used to be the deputy leader of the GLC and I was chair of finance on the GLC. I was part of the rate capping campaign then, and I also worked for the National Union of Mine Workers. Thatcher systematically pursued me by abolishing the GLC, attacking the miners, and anyway, look, the reason I think we're all here is to address a paradox that there is at the moment. The paradox is this, that we're witnessing the worst economic crisis since capitalism since the 1930s. Before Alistair Darling went out of power, he said this is the worst economic crisis since the 1930s. The only thing I ever agreed with him on. And he's right. But what's interesting, the capitalism's an economic crisis, but actually its political structures are relatively stable in this country, relatively unchallenged. And if you look across Europe, Greece and elsewhere in Spain, those structures are being challenged on a daily basis by the mass of the working class, the mass of the people. Why isn't it happening here? Let me just tell you what I think, and it's relevant, I think, to this discussion today. If you look back at the 1930s, actually, the reaction to the depression as it then was, and we're now moving into a Japanese-style long-term depression. We're 5 years into an economic crisis, possibly into a triple dip, but more likely to rub along on a corrugated version of rubbing along a low level of economic activity, high levels of unemployment, cuts in public services, and high levels of underemployment and poverty as a result. If you look at the 30s, the reaction came not in the first years. The reaction and mobilisation of working people came about 5 years into that recession. And it's understandable. I think it's a matter of timing now. The reason there hasn't been a systematic challenge to capitalism in this country is a matter of timing. It's because initially what people do is they rely upon the old structures and the old solutions. It's understandable, isn't it? You look to the existing leaderships and you look initially to the existing policies. Then, when they fail, when people realise they're not working, that's when they start waking up. And I think there's that window of opportunity opening up now. 5 years into this economic crisis, I think people are realising the existing political leaderships, the existing political structures, the existing political and economic policies are not working. And I think that the backlash against austerity is happening now. And people were disappointed that didn't happen straight away and there weren't mass mobilisations. Well, there were some, but not on the scale that we need. But I think it's different this time. I think now, 5 years in, people are beginning to realise the old system isn't working, the old political solutions aren't working, and they're looking for an alternative. So this is where we come in. This is where we come in. We start discussing what are the alternatives. And you do it in two ways, don't you? You look at the individual problems, the real-world problems that people are facing, and how do we tackle them? You know, we had the discussion earlier in the street, didn't we, about the bedroom tax, which everyone's now opposing and all the rest of it. So we look at how we solve that. Well, we solve that by saying if people are imposed, and it's imposed on people and they suffer, they risk eviction, we say to councils, you don't evict them, full stop. And if you try to evict them, we'll turn up and prevent you evicting them. So issue by issue like that, issue by issue like that, we're evolving a solution as a community. It can only come from us as community members. So if you're going to close something, we'll reopen it, we'll occupy it. We'll fight you back on every occasion. So bit by bit, instead of a global strategy, it's hand-to-hand grappling on each of these policies with whoever's implementing them. Whether it's a Tory council, Labour council, or whatever, it doesn't matter. We're fighting you back in that way. We're going to force you back on it. So it's that sort of stage we've reached in the struggle. But it leads on to the discussion, has to, doesn't it, that it isn't about these individual issues, it's the system. So what we've got to do now is talk about how we change the system and what sort of system we want. And it's one that's not based on profit, it's based upon planning for need, and it's one based upon democracy, not dictatorship. Simple as that, isn't it? Really? So everything we do now, in all of our discussions, campaigns and all the rest, yes, let's talk about the campaigning, let's talk about the immediate issue, the presenting problem, what our solution is to that, how do we protect our communities, how do we mobilise them, but in all of that, that will be worthless in the long term if we don't, once we're doing that, talk about what we want in the how we want to transform our society in the longer term. And that, I just say this, and I'll shut up, that's what's happening all over the place at the moment. There isn't a discussion like this going on that someone doesn't get up and say, fine, we might be able to do that in the short term, but what do we do in the long term? What is the real solution to this? And I work with RMT. RMT, we're a union that's growing all the time because we represent our members effectively. We're not just there to defend our wages and conditions. We're now talking about, we can run the rail better than them. How do we bring it into public ownership and nationalise it back again? What sort of nationalisation do we do? It's like that. At universities now, down in Sussex, the students, absolute bloody heroes and heroines, occupying their university, are saying this is about ending privatisation, but it's also about how do we manage our university. Lecturers and students together. So it's those people come together. So I think in the discussions today, recognise, yes, you're not on your own, this is happening everywhere, and on large numbers of people as well. But in addition to that, recognise that people are going beyond just the immediate issue. Yes, it's about mobilisation, it's about how we link communities with the other force that's within the working class, which is the trade union movement, that has the history and resources to do it. How do we ensure that we get secure political representation that's effective and democratic, etc. But it's also about how do we change the system? We've got to demand systemic change. I'm honest with people, I'm a Marxist. You know, this is a classic crisis of the economy, classic capitalist crisis. I've been waiting for this for a generation. For Christ's sake, don't waste it. You know, let's use this to explain to people this system based on greed and profit does not work. What we need is a system based upon planning for need and democratically control it. Three things we need. One is determination. We're determined we're going to fight them back. We're going to win. Courage. Sometimes you just have to stand up on your own sometimes, in a small group or on your own, and just say, I'm not having it, I'm going to fight against it. The third thing, the thing that we learnt 2 centuries ago in the first industrial workshops and in the fields where workers were working, agricultural workers were working, is that united we're strong, divided we're weak. It's all on our banners and all the rest of it. It's called solidarity. It was a secret we learnt that's actually been the most effective weapon we've got. Determination, courage, solidarity. Solidarity.